If I had to think of something common about everyone watching this presentation right now, it's that, like me, you can think of a million and one other things you could be doing for the next 5 or so minutes. Now, that might not inspire a lot of confidence in what's to come, but let me explain. Instead of watching me present, you could be drinking a cup of coffee, you could be taking a stroll on a nearby trail, or you could be mindlessly scrolling through your social media feed as time passes you by. Whatever you choose to do with your time, it's apparent that you have a preference for some activities over others. Not exactly a shocking observation, but in due time, you'll see how preference forms the basis of motivation, and in practice can help solve one of the biggest problems facing students everywhere: procrastination. As with all things, we start with why. Why wake up for that 8:30 a.m. lecture? Why continue to ignore people telling you to watch that show you just have to watch? And on a more positive note, why strive to be the best that you can be? It all boils down to motivation. Motivation is the driving force behind your behaviors. It's why you dream big, strive for change, and initiate and create goals for arduous tasks. Put simply, motivation defines what is worthwhile to do. In behavior psychology, motivation falls under one of two categories: extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Most people are familiar with extrinsic motivation. It comes intuitively. Extrinsic motivation is about engaging in behaviors that you expect to get a reward from. So think back to when your parents were teaching you to say your please and your thank you. They may have said if you said please and thank you, then you would receive some sort of reward like a bowl of M&Ms or something. So over several occurrences, you learned that saying please and thank you was a worthwhile behavior to engage in because there was some reward that you liked, and so you continued to say it. It's important to note that saying please and thank you originally wasn't gratifying in and of itself, but only became so because of the reward. You can see a lot of parallel between extrinsic motivation and a type of operating conditioning called reward training. Contrasting it with its counterpart, intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation refers to behaviors that we choose to do because we believe that they are rewarding in and of itself. From its definition, you can see how intrinsic motivation is quite a subjective experience. Depending on your personality, your mood, your earlier behaviors, and just possibly what you want to do at a certain time, some behaviors are more intrinsically motivating than others. For example, on a cool autumn day like today, there's nothing I would find more fulfilling than snuggling under a blanket and watching a show that I've seen a million times before. Again, watching and relaxing is something that's intrinsically motivating to me because it's something I find pleasurable and there are no external pressures compelling me to perform the behavior. So what we see then is that our behaviors can be guided both by extrinsic motivators and intrinsic motivators, and sometimes even a combination of both. However, as students, we know that there are more situations than none where motivation is sorely lacking when we have to, work in a group project or study for an upcoming midterm. Considering that motivation for a midterm is so low, it's no wonder that we procrastinate. Procrastination is not due to an inability to perform a task, but rather that because we're boxed in to do a set of specific behaviors that we otherwise wouldn't have done because we have a million one other things that we could be doing. In other words, procrastination is a problem of motivation. So there's a psychological principle called the Premack Principle that gives a solution into how we can overcome procrastination by saying that we should focus on more engaging tasks to aid in the completion of less desirable ones. The Premack Principle posits that a lower probability behavior can be reinforced with higher probability behavior so that the action gets done. So think, for example, back to your childhood when your parents may have said something along the lines of, "You can't play video games unless you finish your homework." In this instance, finishing your homework or studying is a low probability behavior because it's less desirable. But you're more likely to do it given that after its completion, you can engage in the more preferred and more desirable behavior of playing video games. Maybe a more pertinent example to students would be when it comes to studying. See, the Premack principle can also be used in the case of studying. In a study used to change the studying habits of probationary students, the Premack principle was applied to see whether the low probability of studying could be used to reinforce the high probability behavior of leaving to go hang out with friends. So, in the study, the researchers provided a private study room where students would go in with their study material and engage for a set specific amount of time and only be permitted to leave once the activity was done. So, what we see there is on the first day, the students were able to engage with the material, only leaving when they found the material to be displeasurable. On the second day, they were able to go in and only leave when they had finished one problem set. And as the days continued on, the requirements for leaving became increasingly difficult, up unto 20 days. As you would expect, by using successive approximation, researchers provided the students with a strong level of reinforcement to engage in studying behavior for amounts of times than they otherwise would. The result of this condition led to the probationary students receiving a significantly higher GPA than others in a control group. So the message is pretty clear. The idea is we engage in studying behaviors and consider everything else. Procrastinating studying is a clear-cut and relatable example of when we consider a million and one other things we could be doing and do them instead of studying. But what we see is that procrastination is not due to an inability on our part, but because of lack of motivation, whether extrinsic or intrinsic, preventing us from doing so. The Premack Principle shows that we can overcome our procrastination by, again, considering the million and one things we could be doing under a new light, wherein the behaviors that we want to engage in aren't in contrast to what we're doing currently, but serve as motivators as to what we should do thereafter. The biggest takeaway then is, like me, you could be doing a million and one other things right now, and in due time you will be, but only after finishing this presentation first. Thank you.